It was one of those evenings where the world seemed to slow down just a little. The kind of evening where the air feels soft and the streets are quiet enough for you to hear your own thoughts. In the small town of Maplewood, life wasn't complicated. People knew each other by name. Kids played outside until the streetlights came on and everyone had their own rhythm. But on this particular night, something happened that no one in Maplewood would ever forget. Jack Harper stood leaning against his car parked right outside the local diner. He liked this spot. It gave him a good view of the comings and goings of the town while he waited for his wife to finish her shift. His shiny black sedan gleamed under the flickering neon sign of the diner. It wasn't just any car. It was his pride and joy. Jack had worked hard for years to afford it, saving every penny from his job as sheriff of Maplewood County. To him, the car wasn't just metal and wheels. It symbolized everything he'd built through patience and determination. He leaned there, hands stuffed into the pockets of his leather jacket. Jack watched the sunset fade behind the horizon. The sky turned shades of orange and pink before settling into a deep purple. Cars passed by occasionally, but nothing out of the ordinary caught his attention. For all intents and purposes, it was shaping up to be another uneventful evening in Maplewood. Little did Jack know, however, that within minutes his peaceful night would spiral into chaos. Down the road, 2 police officers were patrolling the area. They weren't exactly seasoned veterans, just rookies trying to prove themselves. One of them, a tall guy with broad shoulders, sat behind the wheel, gripping it tightly like he was ready for action at any moment. The other, shorter but wiry, scanned the surroundings with sharp eyes, looking for anything suspicious. Both wore expressions of seriousness, even though the town was so quiet that most nights they spent their shifts sipping coffee and chatting about sports. When their patrol car rounded the corner onto Main Street, their headlights swept across the parking lot of the diner. That's when they noticed Jack. At first glance, there didn't seem to be anything unusual about him. Just a man leaning casually against a sleek car, staring off into the distance. But something about the scene didn't sit right with them. Maybe it was how relaxed he looked, or maybe it was the way the light hit his face, making him appear almost too calm for someone standing alone at night. Whatever it was, it triggered a spark of suspicion in their minds. "Hey, check this out," said the taller officer, nudging his partner. "What's he doing out here? Doesn't look like he's waiting for takeout." The shorter officer squinted, narrowing his gaze. "Could be trouble," he replied curtly. "Let's roll up and see what's going on." Without hesitation, they eased the patrol car to a stop near Jack's sedan. The red and blue lights flashed lazily, casting an eerie glow over the otherwise tranquil scene. Jack glanced over his shoulder, mildly surprised to see law enforcement pulling up beside him. He straightened up, figuring they might ask for directions or inquire if everything was okay. After all, he was the sheriff. He should have been used to these kinds of interactions. Yet as the officers stepped out of their vehicle, Jack sensed something different about their demeanor. There was an edge to them, a tension that felt out of place in a town as laid back as Maplewood. "Evening, sir," the taller officer began, his voice firm and authoritative. "Can you tell us what you're doing here?" Jack raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by the question. "I'm just waiting for my wife," he answered calmly, gesturing toward the diner. "She works here tonight." For a moment, the officers exchanged glances as if silently debating whether to believe him. Then, without saying another word, they started circling his car. Their flashlights clicked on, beams slicing through the dim light as they inspected every inch of the sedan. Jack watched them curiously, unsure why they seemed so interested in his vehicle. Sure, it was nice, but it wasn't exactly rare to see a decent car in Maplewood. Then came the moment that shifted the tone entirely. As the shorter officer peered inside the passenger side window, his flashlight landed on a couple of empty beer bottles tucked beneath the seat. His lips pressed into a thin line and he turned back to his partner with a knowing look. "Looks like we've got ourselves a party animal," he muttered sarcastically. Jack sighed inwardly, realizing where this was headed. Those bottles weren't even his. They belonged to his teenage nephew who had borrowed the car last weekend. But explaining that now felt pointless. These officers clearly already made up their minds about him. And unfortunately for everyone involved, Things were about to get much worse. The taller officer's jaw tightened as he stared at the empty beer bottles. To him, they weren't just trash left behind. They were evidence. Evidence of recklessness, maybe even something worse. His mind raced with possibilities. Was this guy drinking and driving? Had he been involved in some kind of trouble earlier that night? The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. "Sir," he said sharply, turning back to Jack, "you want to explain why there are alcohol bottles in your car?" Jack blinked, caught off guard by the accusation. He crossed his arms over his chest, trying to stay calm. "Those aren't mine," he replied evenly. "My nephew borrowed the car last weekend. I don't drink and drive, and I certainly wouldn't leave bottles lying around if I did." But his explanation fell flat. The officers didn't seem interested in hearing excuses. Instead, their eyes narrowed further, skepticism etched across their faces. They exchanged another glance, silently agreeing that Jack's story sounded too convenient to be true. In their minds, he was dodging responsibility, trying to play innocent when the proof was right there in front of them. The shorter officer stepped closer, his flashlight still trained on the car. "You know what this looks like?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "It looks like someone who doesn't care about following the rules. Someone who thinks they're above the law." Jack felt a flicker of frustration ignite inside him. He wasn't used to being talked down to, not in his own town, and especially not by people who didn't know anything about him. But before he could respond, the taller officer spotted something else, a small scratch on the driver's side door. It wasn't deep or noticeable unless you were looking closely, but to him, it might as well have been a neon sign flashing "guilty." "There," he exclaimed, pointing at the scratch. "See that? That's damage. Probably from hitting something or someone." His voice rose slightly, fueled by growing certainty that they had stumbled onto something serious. "This isn't just negligence anymore. This is reckless behavior." By now, a small crowd had begun to gather. A few curious onlookers lingered nearby, drawn by the flashing lights of the patrol car and the rising tension between Jack and the officers. Some whispered among themselves while others simply watched, unsure what was happening. The attention only made things worse for Jack. He hated being the center of drama, especially when he hadn't done anything wrong. "Listen," Jack said, his voice firmer this time. "I don't know how many ways I can say this. I didn't do anything illegal. That scratch has been there for weeks. It's from backing into a pole near my house. And those bottles, like I said, they're not mine." But the officers weren't listening anymore. Their confidence in their assumptions had grown so strong that they stopped seeing Jack as a person and started treating him like a suspect. The taller officer turned to his partner and nodded toward the car. "We should impound it," he said, decisively. "If we let him go, who knows what he'll do next." Jack's frustration boiled over. "Impound my car for what? Because of a scratch and a couple of bottles? You've got to be kidding me." His raised voice only confirmed their suspicions. To them, his anger was proof that he was hiding something. The shorter officer stepped forward, placing a hand on his utility belt. "Sir, calm down," he warned. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." At that moment, Jack realized he wasn't going to win this argument. These two were determined to see him as guilty, no matter what he said. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay composed. Arguing wasn't going to help. He needed to find a way to de-escalate the situation before it got completely out of hand. But as he opened his mouth to try again, the taller officer pulled out a lighter from his pocket. Jack froze. "What are you doing with that?" he asked, his voice tight with alarm. The officer smirked, holding the lighter up between two fingers. "Just teaching you a lesson," he said coldly. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before breaking the rules." Before Jack could react, the officer flicked the lighter open. The tiny flame danced in the cool evening air, casting an ominous glow. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he realized what was about to happen. "Wait!" he shouted, stepping forward. "You can't—" But it was too late. The officer leaned down and touched the flame to the edge of the car's upholstery. The fabric caught fire almost instantly, sending thick plumes of smoke billowing into the air. Flames licked hungrily at the interior of the sedan, spreading faster than anyone expected. Panic erupted among the bystanders as they scrambled backward, shouting warnings and pulling out their phones to record the scene. Jack stood frozen, staring in disbelief as his prized possession went up in flames. His mind struggled to process what was happening. How had this escalated so quickly? 1 minute he was waiting peacefully for his wife, and the next, his car was being destroyed in front of his eyes. Anger surged through him, raw and overwhelming. He clenched his fists, fighting the urge to lunge at the officers responsible. Through the chaos, one of the onlookers shouted, "Hey, what's going on here? Why are they burning his car?" Another chimed in, "This is insane. Someone call the fire department." The officers seemed momentarily stunned by the intensity of the reaction. They hadn't anticipated such a strong backlash from the crowd. As the fire grew larger, devouring the car's interior, the taller officer finally snapped out of his haze. "We need to get out of here," he muttered urgently to his partner. But before they could retreat, Jack found his voice. "Do you idiots have any idea who I am?" he bellowed, his words cutting through the commotion like a knife. All eyes turned to him as he reached into his jacket and pulled out his badge. The shiny silver emblem gleamed under the flickering light of the flames. Silence fell over the scene as everyone processed what they were seeing. The officers' faces went pale, their expressions shifting from smug superiority to sheer horror. They had just burned the car of the man who outranked them, the sheriff himself, and in that moment they knew their lives would never be the same. The crowd around them seemed to hold its breath. The flames from Jack's car were still roaring, casting flickering shadows on everyone's faces. Smoke curled into the night sky, mixing with the neon glow of the diner's sign. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. All eyes were fixed on Jack as he held up his badge, the metal catching the light like an unspoken declaration of authority. The two officers stared at him, their earlier bravado melting away like ice under the summer sun. Their faces went pale, and beads of sweat began forming on their foreheads despite the cool evening air. It was clear they hadn't expected this twist, not in a million years. They had been so sure they were dealing with just another reckless civilian, someone who thought the rules didn't apply to them. But now, standing before them was the very person responsible for enforcing those rules in Maplewood County. Jack's voice cut through the silence, low but sharp. "You want to explain yourselves?" he asked, his tone icy enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The weight of his words carried more force than any raised voice ever could. The taller officer stammered, struggling to find something, anything to say. Sir, we didn't know it was you," he managed finally, his voice trembling. His partner stood frozen beside him, mouth slightly open, looking like a kid caught red-handed sneaking cookies from the jar. Jack let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Didn't know it was me? That's your excuse? You torched my car because you didn't know I'm the sheriff? Do you even hear how ridiculous that sounds?" The shorter officer finally found his voice, though it came out weak and shaky. We thought you were suspicious. The bottles, the scratch on the door. It all added up." "It added up to what?" Jack shot back, his frustration bubbling over. "To you deciding I'm guilty without asking questions? To burning my property instead of doing your damn job properly?" By now, the crowd had grown larger. More people had spilled out of the diner and nearby shops, drawn by the commotion. Some recorded the scene on their phones while others whispered among themselves, shaking their heads in disbelief. One older man muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "This is why nobody trusts cops anymore." His words hung heavy, in the air, adding another layer of tension to the already explosive situation. Jack glanced at the growing audience, realizing how bad this looked, not just for him, but for the entire department. If word got out about what happened here tonight, it wouldn't just be these two officers facing consequences. The whole town's trust in law enforcement would take a hit, and that wasn't something he could afford to let happen. Taking a deep breath, Jack stepped closer to the officers, lowering his voice so only they could hear. "You've made a mess tonight, a big one. But right now we need to fix this before it gets worse, understand? They nodded quickly, too stunned to argue. Jack turned back to the crowd, raising his hands slightly to get their attention. "Folks," he said, his voice steady and calm, "I appreciate your concern, but this is being handled. Please go back inside. There's nothing more to see here." For a moment no one moved, then slowly, the onlookers began to disperse. A few lingered, reluctant to leave entirely, but most returned to the diner or wandered off muttering under their breath. The fire department arrived shortly after, dousing the remains of the car with water until the flames sputtered out. What was left of Jack's once pristine sedan was little more than a charred shell, smoking quietly in the parking lot. As the chaos settled, Jack turned his attention back to the two officers. Both looked like they wanted to disappear into the ground. The taller one kept glancing at the ruined car, guilt written all over his face. "Sir," he said hesitantly, We didn't mean for this to happen. We thought we were doing our duty." Jack sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Doing your duty doesn't mean jumping to conclusions or taking matters into your own hands. You're supposed to protect people, not destroy their property. And you sure as hell don't burn someone's car based on a hunch." The shorter officer chimed in, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll make it right, sir, whatever it takes." Jack studied them for a long moment, weighing their remorse against the damage they'd caused. Finally, he nodded. "You're damn right you'll make it right. But this isn't just about replacing a car. This is about accountability and learning that actions have consequences. Tomorrow morning you'll report to Chief Anderson. He'll decide what happens next." With that, Jack walked away, leaving the two officers standing there amidst the wreckage. As he moved toward the diner to check on his wife, he couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions swirling inside him. Anger, frustration, and maybe even a hint of sadness. This wasn't how things were supposed to work in Maplewood. Law enforcement was meant to build trust, not tear it down. And now, thanks to these two, he had a lot of work ahead of him to repair the cracks this incident had created. Inside the diner, his wife greeted him with a worried expression. "What happened out there?" she asked, noticing the tension in his posture. Jack forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just a long night," he replied simply. "Let's get home." But as they drove away in her car, Jack knew this wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. The next morning, news of the incident spread faster than wildfire. In a town as small as Maplewood, secrets didn't last long, and this wasn't just a secret, it was a scandal. By sunrise, nearly everyone had heard about what happened in the diner parking lot. The story traveled through whispers at the local coffee shop, gossip over backyard fences, and heated debates during breakfast. Some folks were outraged. Others couldn't help but chuckle at the irony of two rookie officers torching their boss's car. But no matter how people reacted, one thing was clear. The trust between the community and law enforcement had taken a serious hit. At the police station, tension hung thick in the air like storm clouds before a downpour. Chief Anderson called an emergency meeting first thing in the morning, gathering all officers into the briefing room. Jack walked in last, his expression unreadable. He took a seat near the back, arms crossed, watching silently as murmurs filled the space. Everyone knew why they were there, but no one dared speak too loudly. When Chief Anderson finally stepped up to address the group, the room fell silent. "Let me start by saying this," Anderson began, his voice firm but measured. "What happened last night is unacceptable. It doesn't matter who was involved, or what led to it. Burning someone's property is not justice. It's reckless, irresponsible, and a betrayal of everything we stand for." His words landed heavily, and several officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The two rookies responsible sat stiffly in the front row, their faces red with shame. They looked like kids caught vandalizing a school wall, except this time, the stakes were much higher. Anderson paused, letting his message sink in before continuing. "This isn't just about them," he said, gesturing toward the pair. "It's about all of us. We wear these badges because the people of Maplewood trust us to protect them, not abuse our power. Last night, That trust was broken, and if we don't fix it, we risk losing something far more valuable than any car. Jack leaned forward slightly, listening intently. He appreciated Anderson's straightforward approach, but he also knew talk alone wouldn't be enough. Words were important, sure, but actions mattered more. As the sheriff, it was his responsibility to lead by example, to show both his team and the community that mistakes could be turned into lessons. When Anderson finished speaking, he turned the floor over to Jack. For a moment, the room felt quieter than ever, every eye fixed on him. Jack stood slowly, his movements deliberate. He took a deep breath, then began. "I'm not going to lie," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Last night hurt, not just because my car got burned, but because I saw firsthand how easy it is to lose sight of what really matters. Trust, respect, integrity. These aren't just words we throw around. They're the foundation of everything we do." He paused, scanning the room. Some officers nodded while others avoided his gaze altogether. Jack continued, his tone softening slightly. "I've been where you are. I remember being new on the job, eager to prove myself, sometimes jumping to conclusions too quickly. But here's the thing. When you put on this badge, you're making a promise to serve and protect, not judge or punish without cause." His words resonated deeply, especially with the younger officers. Many of them had joined the force full of idealism, wanting to make a difference in their community. But somewhere along the way, the pressure of the job and the desire to appear tough had clouded their judgment. Jack's reminder brought them back to why they started in the first place. "To move forward," Jack said, "we need to learn from this. Starting today, we're implementing mandatory training sessions focused on de-escalation techniques and ethical decision-making. No excuses, no exceptions. If we want the people of Maplewood to trust us again, we have to earn it, one step at a time." As he spoke, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The tension eased slightly, replaced by a sense of resolve. Even the two rookies sat up straighter, nodding along as if determined to do better. Jack ended his speech with a simple yet powerful statement. "Mistakes happen. What defines us isn't the mistake itself, it's how we choose to grow from it." After the meeting, Jack pulled the two officers aside for a private conversation. Both looked like they'd rather face a firing squad than meet his gaze. "Look," Jack said, keeping his tone neutral. "What's done is done. You can't undo what happened last night. But you can decide what comes next." The taller officer swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll do whatever it takes to make it right, sir." Jack nodded. "Good. Because this isn't just about me or my car. This is about rebuilding trust with the community, with each other, and with yourselves. Start by owning your actions. Apologize sincerely. And then, prove that you've learned from this." Over the following days, the officers followed through on Jack's advice. They issued a public apology during a town hall meeting, standing humbly before the residents of Maplewood and taking full responsibility for their actions. It wasn't easy. They stumbled over their words and fought back nerves, but the sincerity in their voices shone through. To Jack's relief, the crowd responded with understanding rather than anger. People clapped softly, acknowledging their effort to make amends. Meanwhile, Jack worked behind the scenes to reinforce positive changes within the department. He introduced monthly workshops where officers discussed real-life scenarios and brainstormed solutions together. He encouraged open dialogue, inviting feedback from both his team and the community. Slowly but surely, the cracks in the foundation began to mend. For Jack, the experience served as a wake-up call. It reminded him that leadership wasn't just about giving orders, it was about guiding others even when they made mistakes. And though his beloved car was gone, he gained something far more valuable, a renewed commitment to serving his town with humility and grace. As life in Maplewood returned to its usual rhythm, people talked less about the incident and more about the lessons learned. The charred remains of Jack's sedan became a symbol, not of destruction but of growth. And in the end, that's exactly what Maplewood needed most. In the weeks that followed, Maplewood began to heal. The incident with the burned car became less of a hot topic around town and more of a lesson learned, a cautionary tale whispered over coffee or mentioned during community meetings. But for Jack Harper, the memory lingered like an old scar. It wasn't painful anymore, but it served as a constant reminder of how fragile trust could be. And while he appreciated the progress his department was making, he knew there was still work to do. One afternoon, Jack found himself sitting on a bench near the park, where kids laughed and played under the warm sun. He watched them chase each other across the grass, their joy infectious. For a moment, he allowed himself to forget about the stress of being sheriff, the late-night calls, the tough decisions, the weight of responsibility. Instead, he focused on the simplicity of the scene in front of him. Families enjoying time together, friends chatting casually, and dogs wagging their tails as they trotted alongside their owners. It struck him then just how much this town meant to him. Maplewood wasn't perfect. It had its share of problems like any place, but it was home. Its people were resilient, kind-hearted, and willing to forgive if given a chance. That's what made rebuilding trust possible after the chaos of that night. People here didn't expect perfection, they just wanted honesty and effort, and Jack intended to give them both. As he sat there lost in thought, a familiar voice pulled him back to reality. "Didn't think I'd find you out here," said Chief Anderson, approaching with a cup of coffee in hand. He took a seat beside Jack, offering him a small smile. "How are you holding up?" Jack shrugged, leaning back against the bench. "I'm okay, just thinking about everything that's happened." Anderson nodded knowingly. "Big changes don't happen overnight, but I've seen the difference already. The guys are stepping up and the community seems more open to talking. You've done good, Jack." Jack exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I hope so. Sometimes it feels like we're moving forward, and other times, well, let's just say old habits die hard." The chief chuckled softly. "True enough. But remember, it's not just about fixing what went wrong. It's about setting an example for the future. What you did, calling those officers out, holding them accountable, yet giving them a chance to grow, that's leadership. Folks notice stuff like that." Jack glanced at him, appreciating the reassurance. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more he could do. The training sessions and workshops were helping, sure, but he wanted something bigger, something that would leave a lasting impact on both his team and the community, something tangible. A few days later, inspiration struck. Jack called another meeting at the station, this time inviting not only his officers, but also members of the public. When everyone gathered in the briefing room, curiosity buzzed in the air. No one quite knew what to expect, but they trusted Jack enough to show up. "Thanks for coming," Jack began, standing at the front of the room. "I know your time is valuable, so I'll get straight to the point. We've been working hard to rebuild trust after some mistakes were made, and I think we're heading in the right direction. But I believe we can do even better." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "So here's my idea. I want us to start a program called Walk the Beat. It's simple. Every week, a group of officers will spend time walking through different neighborhoods, not patrolling, not responding to calls, but connecting. Talking to residents, listening to concerns, sharing stories, building relationships face to face." "The room erupted into murmurs. Some officers exchanged skeptical looks, unsure how effective such an initiative would be. Others nodded enthusiastically, intrigued by the concept. One older officer raised his hand hesitantly. "Won't that take time away from actual police work?" he asked. "It is police work," Jack replied firmly. "Our job isn't just to enforce laws, it's to understand the people we serve, to see them as neighbors, not suspects. If we want to prevent problems instead of just reacting to them, we need to build bridges. That's what this program is about." The crowd seemed convinced, or at least willing to give it a shot. A woman from the community spoke up, her voice filled with cautious optimism. "This sounds promising," she admitted, "but it'll only work if everyone's committed to it. Both sides need to meet halfway." Jack smiled warmly. "Exactly. This isn't just on us, it's on all of us. So who's in?" Hands started raising tentatively at first, then more confidently. By the end of the meeting, nearly everyone present had signed up to participate in the program. Even the 2 rookie officers volunteered eagerly, eager to prove they were serious about change. The first Walk the Beat session took place the following Saturday morning. Officers paired off and fanned out across various neighborhoods, armed with nothing but notepads and open minds. At first, interactions were awkward. Residents eyed the uniformed figures warily, unsure whether to engage or keep their distance. But slowly, conversations began to flow. Officers shared jokes with parents pushing strollers, chatted with teenagers shooting hoops at the park, and listened intently as elderly residents recounted memories of growing up in Maplewood. For Jack, the highlight came when he joined one of the groups in the southern part of town. As they strolled down a quiet street lined with oak trees, a young boy no older than 10 ran up to them, clutching a soccer ball. "Are you really cops?" he asked, wide-eyed. "We sure are," Jack replied with a grin. "Why? You got something to tell us?" The boy giggled, shaking his head. "Nope, just wondering if you play soccer." Without missing a beat, Jack turned to his fellow officers. "What do you say, fellas? Ready to show him our moves?" Before long, a makeshift game sprang up in the middle of the street, drawing cheers from onlookers. Laughter echoed through the neighborhood as kids and officers alike kicked the ball back and forth, forgetting titles and roles for a little while. It was a small moment, but it carried a powerful message. Connection mattered more than authority. By the time the day ended, everyone involved felt a renewed sense of purpose. Officers returned to the station buzzing with stories about the people they'd met and the insights they'd gained. Residents talked about how refreshing it was to see law enforcement acting not as enforcers, but as partners in the community. For Jack, the success of the program reinforced a truth he'd always believed. Real change started with understanding. Mistakes might have brought them here, but compassion and effort would carry them forward. And as Maplewood continued to grow, stronger, Jack knew they were on the right path. One step, one conversation, one relationship at a time. As the weeks turned into months, Walk the Beat became more than just a program. It became a cornerstone of life in Maplewood. The weekly walks transformed into something people looked forward to, both for the officers and the residents. Kids started waving excitedly whenever they spotted uniforms walking down their streets. Parents stopped mid-conversation to share concerns or simply exchange pleasantries. Even the local businesses got involved, offering free coffee or snacks to the officers during their rounds. Slowly but surely, the invisible walls between law enforcement and the community began to crumble. For Jack Harper, this shift was deeply rewarding. He saw it everywhere he went, the smiles on faces, the ease with which conversations flowed, the trust that had once been fractured now steadily rebuilding itself. But what touched him most were the little moments. An elderly woman thanking him for helping her carry groceries one day, a teenager confiding in him about peer pressure at school, or a group of kids asking if he'd come back next week for another impromptu soccer match. These weren't grand gestures, they were small human connections. And yet, they meant everything. But not every interaction was smooth sailing. There were still challenges. Some people remained guarded, unwilling to let go of past grievances. One evening, while walking through a neighborhood known for its tight-knit but skeptical community, Jack encountered a man who crossed his arms and glared at him from across the street. "You think showing up here changes anything?" the man asked sharply, his tone laced with bitterness. "We've seen your kind before." Jack didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded respectfully. "I understand why you feel that way," he said calmly. "And I'm not here to tell you otherwise. All I can do is show up, listen, and try to earn your trust again. That's all any of us can do." The man studied him for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "Fine. Talk if you want, but don't expect miracles." It wasn't a victory by any means, but it was progress. Jack knew that healing took time, especially when wounds ran deep. What mattered was staying consistent, showing up even when it felt like no one cared. Because sometimes consistency spoke louder than words. Back at the station, the officers noticed a change within themselves, too. The rookies who had burned Jack's car were now among the most dedicated participants in the program. They walked neighborhoods with genuine curiosity, asking questions and learning names. Their earlier arrogance had given way to humility, and their actions reflected a newfound respect for the badge they wore. During one session, the taller officer found himself sitting on a porch swing with an older gentleman, sharing stories about growing up in different parts of town. By the end of the conversation, the man patted him on the shoulder and said, "You keep this up, son, and you'll make a fine cop." Those words hit him harder than he expected. For so long, he'd been focused on proving himself through authority, thinking toughness equaled respect. Now he realized true respect came from listening, understanding and serving without expecting anything in return. It was a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. Meanwhile, Jack decided it was time to address the elephant in the room, or rather the charred remains of his beloved sedan. The burned-out shell of the car had been towed away months ago, but its memory lingered. Some residents joked about it lightheartedly, saying things like, "Guess we know whose car not to park near during patrol." Others offered to chip in and help replace it, touched by how Jack had handled the situation with grace, instead of anger. At first, Jack brushed off the offers. He didn't want anyone feeling obligated to contribute financially. But eventually, the idea evolved into something bigger, a community fundraiser. Local businesses donated goods and services, families hosted bake sales, and kids organized lemonade stands. The goal wasn't just to buy Jack a new car, it was to celebrate the unity and resilience of Maplewood. On the day of the event, the town square buzzed with energy. Booths lined the streets, selling homemade pies, crafts, and raffle tickets. A band played cheerful tunes on a makeshift stage while children ran around with balloons tied to their wrists. At the center of it all stood Jack, shaking hands and thanking everyone for their generosity. When the check was presented to him later that evening, Jack couldn't hold back his emotions. His voice cracked slightly as he addressed the crowd. "This isn't just about a car," he said, holding the oversized novelty check high for everyone to see. "This is about us, about what we can accomplish when we come together. Thank you for reminding me why I love this town so much." Applause erupted, echoing through the square as people cheered and hugged one another. In that moment, it felt like Maplewood wasn't just a place on a map. It was a family. In the days that followed, Jack picked out a new vehicle. A sturdy SUV, practical yet stylish. It wasn't flashy like his old sedan, but it suited him perfectly. More importantly, it symbolized a fresh start, not just for him but for the entire community. As he drove it home for the first time, he couldn't help but smile at the sight of kids waving enthusiastically from their front yards. That night, as he sat on his porch watching the stars twinkle above, Jack reflected on how far they'd come since that chaotic evening outside the diner. Mistakes had been made, lessons learned, and bridges rebuilt. Life in Mapletown wasn't perfect, it never would be. But it was better, stronger, kinder. And as Jack leaned back in his chair, sipping a cup of tea, he realized something profound. Sometimes the hardest moments lead to the greatest growth. The fire that destroyed his car had also ignited a spark of hope, connection, and shared humanity. And for that, he was grateful. Life in Maplewood settled into a rhythm that felt lighter, warmer, and more connected than ever before. The scars of the past hadn't disappeared, they never truly would, but they had healed enough to let people move forward. For Jack Harper, this newfound sense of unity wasn't just something he witnessed. It became a part of his daily life. Every morning as he drove through the streets in his new SUV, he saw reminders of how far the town, and its relationship with law enforcement, had come. The Walk the Beat program continued to thrive, evolving into something even bigger than Jack had imagined. What started as weekly walks turned into monthly community events. barbecues at the park, movie nights under the stars, and volunteer cleanup days where officers worked side by side with residents to beautify neighborhoods. These gatherings weren't planned to check boxes or meet quotas. They happened because people wanted them to. They were proof that when trust was rebuilt, it brought out the best in everyone. One Saturday afternoon, during one of these events, Jack found himself flipping burgers at a grill set up near the town square. Kids darted around playing tag while parents lounged on picnic blankets, chatting and laughing. A group of teenagers strummed guitars nearby, their music blending with the hum of conversation. It was a scene straight out of a postcard, one that made Jack pause and take it all in. As he flipped another burger, an older woman approached him, holding a plate with a hopeful smile. "Think you can spare one for an old lady?" she asked teasingly. Jack grinned, grabbing a fresh bun and sliding the patty onto it. "For you? Anything," he replied, handing it over. "How's everything going today?" She nodded appreciatively, taking a bite before answering. "Better than it has in years, if I'm being honest. Feels like, I don't know, like we're finally remembering how to be neighbors again." Her words struck a chord with Jack. That's exactly what this was about. Not just fixing broken relationships, but rediscovering what it meant to live together as a community. He glanced around at the lively scene, the smiling faces, the shared laughter, the way people seemed comfortable in each other's presence. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that's what mattered most. Later that evening, after the crowd had thinned and the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack sat on a bench overlooking the square. The shorter rookie officer who had once flicked open a lighter in anger joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Jack without saying a word, then settled onto the bench beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was reflective. Finally, the officer broke the silence. "You think we'll ever fully make up for what happened?" he asked softly, staring into his cup. Jack sipped his coffee thoughtfully before responding. "I don't know if making up is the right way to look at it," he said. "What matters is that we've learned from it. You've grown, the department's grown, and so has the town. That's worth more than any apology." The officer nodded slowly, processing Jack's words. "Still feels like I owe you something, though." Jack chuckled lightly, clapping him on the shoulder. "You've already paid your debt, in effort, in change, and showing up every day and doing better. Keep that up and you'll keep earning trust. That's all anyone can ask for." They sat there for a little longer, watching the last bits of daylight fade into twilight. Fireflies began to dance in the distance, their soft glow adding a touch of magic to the peaceful night. It was moments like these that reminded Jack why he loved his job. Not because of the badge or the authority, but because of the people. Because of the chance to make a difference, however small, in someone's life. Back at home later that night, Jack poured himself a glass of water and stood by the window, gazing out at the quiet street. His wife came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Long day?" she asked gently. "Not really," he replied, leaning back against her. "Just fulfilling." She smiled, resting her chin on his shoulder. "Sounds like things are going well then." "They are," he admitted. "But it's not just about work anymore. It's about connection, about seeing people for who they are instead of what they represent. I guess I've learned that leadership isn't about standing apart, it's about standing with." His wife kissed his cheek, squeezing him tightly. "Well, I'm proud of you, always have been." The next morning, as Jack pulled into the station parking lot, he noticed a group of kids gathered near the entrance. They waved excitedly when they saw him step out of the car. One of them ran up, breathless with excitement. "Sheriff, we made you something." Curious, Jack followed the boy to where the others stood, holding up a handmade sign. It read, "Thanks for being our hero," in colorful letters surrounded by drawings of police badges and hearts. Jack felt his throat tighten as he looked at their eager faces. "You didn't have to do this," he said, crouching down to their level. But thank you, it means a lot." The kids beamed, clearly pleased with themselves. As they skipped away, Jack stood there for a moment staring at the sign. It wasn't fancy or expensive, but it carried more weight than any trophy ever could. It was a reminder that actions, no matter how small, could leave lasting impressions. That afternoon, Jack hung the sign in his office, taping it proudly to the wall behind his desk. When Chief Anderson walked in and saw it, he raised an eyebrow. "Looks like you've got some new fans," he remarked with a grin. Jack leaned back in his chair, folding his hands behind his head. "Guess I do," he said with a satisfied smile. "And honestly, I couldn't be happier about it." Maplewood wasn't immune to challenges. It never would be. Life always found ways to test people, pushing them to grow and adapt. But thanks to the lessons learned from mistakes and the efforts made to rebuild trust, the town faced those challenges together. Neighbors helped neighbors. Officers listened instead of judged. And Jack Harper led not with power, but with heart. The end. The story of the burned car wasn't just about destruction. It was about renewal. About finding light in the ashes and building something stronger than before. For Maplewood, it became a symbol of hope. And for Jack, it became a reminder that even in the toughest moments, humanity could shine brightest. Maplewood wasn't just a town anymore. It was a living example of what could happen when people chose understanding over judgment, connection over division. The story of the burned car had become part of its history, not as a mark of shame, but as a turning point. It reminded everyone that mistakes were inevitable, but growth was possible if you were willing to face them head-on. For Jack Harper, life settled into a rhythm that felt fulfilling in ways he hadn't expected. Every day brought new opportunities to strengthen the bond between the community and law enforcement. Officers weren't seen as outsiders anymore. They were neighbors, friends, and sometimes even heroes. Kids waved at patrol cars driving by, shouting greetings from their front yards. Parents approached officers at grocery stores to thank them for their work or simply chat about the weather. These small moments added up, creating a foundation of trust that grew stronger with time. 1. Crisp autumn morning, Jack decided to take a walk through the park before heading to the station. The leaves crunched underfoot, painted in shades of red, orange, and gold. He loved this time of year. The air carried a hint of chill, and the world seemed quieter, more reflective. As he strolled along the path, he noticed a group of seniors sitting on benches, sipping coffee and swapping stories. One of them spotted him and waved him over. "Sheriff, come join us," the man called out warmly. "We're debating who makes the best pumpkin pie," Jack chuckled, taking a seat beside them. "Now that's a debate worth having," he said, leaning back comfortably. "Anyone got a secret recipe?" The conversation quickly turned lively, with everyone chiming in about their favorite desserts. But soon, one of the women leaned forward, her expression softening. "You know, Sheriff," she began, "we don't say it enough, but we're grateful for everything you've done, for sticking by us even when things got tough." Jack felt a lump rise in his throat. He looked around at the kind faces surrounding him and realized how much these people meant to him. "It's my privilege," he replied sincerely. "This town has given me so much. If I can give back even half of what I've received, I'll consider myself lucky." The woman patted his hand affectionately. "Well, you've done more than your share. Just don't forget to take care of yourself, too." Her words lingered with him long after he left the park. They reminded him that leadership wasn't just about serving others. It was also about recognizing your own limits and needs. Over the years, Jack had poured his heart into his work, often neglecting his own well-being. But now, surrounded by a community that genuinely cared, he found himself slowing down, appreciating the little things, and allowing himself to rest. At the station later that day, Jack gathered his team for a meeting. The room buzzed with energy as officers shared updates on recent successes: a neighborhood watch program that had reduced break-ins, a mentorship initiative pairing officers with at-risk youth, and plans for a holiday toy drive to support local families. Each report was met with applause and encouragement, a testament to how far they'd come since those tense days following the incident. When it was Jack's turn to speak, he stood quietly for a moment, letting the positivity sink in. Then, with a thoughtful smile, he addressed the group. "I want to start by saying how proud I am of all of you. You've worked hard, not because you had to, but because you wanted to, because you believed in making a difference. And the results are clear. People trust us again. They see us as partners, not just enforcers." He paused, looking around the room at the faces of his team. Some were seasoned veterans, while others were still learning the ropes. But each one of them shared a common goal: to serve Maplewood with integrity and compassion. "That being said," Jack continued, "we can't let ourselves get complacent. Trust isn't something you earn once and forget about. It's something you nurture every single day. So keep showing up, keep listening, keep caring. That's how we'll continue to grow, not just as officers, but as human beings." The room erupted into applause, and Jack couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. These men and women weren't just colleagues. They were family. Together, they had transformed a crisis into an opportunity, proving that even the darkest moments could lead to brighter futures. As the weeks passed, Jack found joy in the simplest parts of his routine. Mornings started with a cup of coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant hues. Evenings ended with quiet dinners at home, sharing laughter and stories with his wife. On weekends, he joined the community for festivals, parades, and volunteer projects, always finding new ways to connect with the people he served. One chilly December evening, during the annual tree lighting ceremony in the town square, Jack stood near the massive pine tree adorned with twinkling lights. Families huddled together, sipping hot cocoa and singing carols. Children darted around, their laughter filling the air like music. As the mayor stepped up to flip the switch that would illuminate the tree, he motioned for Jack to join him on stage. Caught off guard, Jack hesitated for a moment before walking up to join him. The crowd erupted into cheers as the mayor placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "Before we light the tree," the mayor announced, "I want to take a moment to thank someone who has done so much for our town. Sheriff Jack Harper has shown us that true leadership comes from the heart. Let's give him a round of applause." Jack felt overwhelmed as the cheers grew louder, echoing through the square. He waved awkwardly, unsure of what to say. When the noise finally subsided, he leaned toward the microphone. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "None of this would be possible without all of you. This town is special because of the people in it, and I'm honored to call myself one of you." As the tree lit up, casting a golden glow over the crowd, Jack stepped off the stage and blended back into the festivities. People stopped him along the way, offering hugs, handshakes, and heartfelt thanks. By the end of the night, his cheeks hurt from smiling so much. Later that evening, as Jack drove home through the softly falling snow, he reflected on how far they'd come. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Maplewood wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was a place where people cared for one another, where mistakes were forgiven, lessons were learned, and connections were cherished. Back at home, Jack sat by the fireplace, staring into the flickering flames. His wife curled up beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Feels like a good year, doesn't it?" she murmured sleepily. "It does," Jack agreed, wrapping an arm around her. "And I think next year will be even better." In that moment, surrounded by warmth and love, Jack knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The story of the burned car had taught him, and everyone in Maplewood, that challenges could either break you or bring you closer together. And in choosing unity, they had built something unshakable. As the fire crackled softly and the snow fell outside, Jack closed his eyes, feeling at peace. Life in Maplewood wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving, about finding strength in vulnerability, hope in hardship, and humanity in every interaction. And for Jack Harper, that was the greatest gift of all.